back to another episode of Combat Talk. I am your favorite MMA host. For the meantime, we are gathered with a different MMA host who's probably your favorite over me, which, whatever, man. I get it. I am Sophia Foyer, but today we have the lovely Ian Parker. He is an ESPN analyst. He covers UFC, he covers PFL. He has his own very own show called ESPN BETS. Now we're here to sit down with the one, the only, Ian Parker. Now we're going to get right into it. I want to know more about your background from high school into being a sports analyst, if you could get into that.
Sure. Where do we start? I went to East Meadow High School, Long Island, New York. Grew up there, wrestled, played every sport under the sun you could think of. Back then MMA was still a no rules, no holds barred situation. It wasn't mainstream. It wasn't anything exciting just yet. Really until I got to college. I went to SUNY Albany, which was a very interesting experience to say the least. Graduated, survived, so we'll say that was a success in itself. While I was there, a few friends of mine in my fraternity were very big on MMA, and they would show me DVDs of like Pride and old school UFC stuff. And what ended up happening was one night, one of my buddies goes, "Hey, you got to check this out. You got to turn this on." And it ended up being, what was it? The finals of The Ultimate Fighter with Forrest Griffin versus Stephan Bonnar. I got to see Kenny Florian fight, which is fun because I ended up working with him 15 years later, which came full circle. And when that happened, I kind of fell in love with the sport. Being a wrestler, if you don't do it in college, you don't go to the Olympics, you kind of get lost. So coincidentally, Matt Serra was somebody who I knew through my childhood. His cousins and I went to high school, middle school, elementary school together. So one of my buddies was like, "Hey, when you come back home, why don't you come over with me to Serra's place? We can start training a little jujitsu." And I was like, "All right." So I did. I shot him for a double leg takedown on a black belt my first day. I got put to sleep and I never turned back. So that was really how everything kind of started with my MMA journey, if you want to call it that.
Well, I'm a fan of Matt Serra, as I think most people are, for his humor, for his fighting.
Yes,
But you work for ESPN now, and I
correct.
kind of want to know, what was it like getting to that point? And not a lot of people can say they've worked for ESPN because it's such a great opportunity, but also a great job, as you have shown over the years. But I want to know, how did you actually get into ESPN and what you do today?
Yeah, you know what? This was something that I don't think I ever expected happening, especially with this sport because it's such a niche sport. How did it happen? Well, I was doing John Anik and Kenny Florian's podcast as their residential betting expert for quite a bit of time. And a gentleman by the name of Jonathan Coachman, aka the Coach, he was friends with the producer of John Anik's show, who I was friends with too. There was a lot of interesting connections there, and it just really good timing because Coach was looking for someone to help him with CBS Sports with MMA, and he was starting a betting show. So he pretty much, brought me on, and he said to me, "If you follow me, I think I can get you on TV in the next couple of years." And I'm not even kidding you. It was like 6 weeks later, the PFL reached out to him and said, "Hey, we're looking to do a betting show. Um, we don't know who that person is you're working with." Although I've been in the MMA space way before that. I was that manager for Chris Weidman, who I brought into the UFC. I managed a lot of big names just behind the scenes because managers really should not be out in front the way they try to be. And, when I worked for Coach, this was someone who's been with ESPN. This is someone who worked for the WWE for a very long time. So who can teach you how to be on TV better and express your personality and learn how to look at the camera and speak a certain way better than this man? And the fact that he was willing to put his name, reputation, his stamp on me really meant the world to me because that was something that meant for me, I got to put my all into this, especially if I want to do it. And not even kidding you, 6 weeks later, when the PFL happened, we had a meeting. It just so worked out that Kenny Florian was brought on as an on-air commentary piece for them. So it was almost like it was fate in a weird way. So worked for PFL. And after that first season ended in August, ESPN reached out to Coach and said, "Hey, what's Ian's contract look like with everyone? We'd love to bring him in and have a talk." And I'm not kidding you. That day he called me. He's like, "Hey, can you hop on a Zoom call in an hour? ESPN is interested." And I think, 4 hours later of like three different Zooms back and forth, I got a call back saying, "Hey, we'd love to offer you this deal, and we need you on a plane in 3 days to go be on set for Alexander Volkanovski versus Brian Ortega." And that was where it all started. So it's been an amazing journey. Like you said, ESPN is something I grew up watching as a kid with all sports. Getting to do this as my career, getting to be part of that ESPN team, it is really special. And, I value every second I have with it. It's been an amazing journey so far.
Now, with you saying that your main focus is betting, I kind of want to know what was your like not your experience, but how did you really get into that field of MMA?
Well, growing up, my father was big on NFL betting. So my buddy and I, we joke about this now, being that we're both turning 40 soon, that when we were like 5 or 6, 7, 8 years old, we were writing these numbers down on a board for our dads, not having a clue what it was. And it was literally betting lines and everything else. Just not just, we thought we were just doing simple math as kids. So growing up, I got into betting. I was betting myself. And the one sport that I just felt was the easiest one to bet based on knowledge, based on my own analysis, was MMA. And when betting just started becoming really, really big in the last X amount of years, it was like, you know what? No one's really doing this. At some point, these big networks are going to adapt and jump on. And when I was one of the only people doing it on a big, not one of the only people doing it per se, there's a lot of good guys out there, but the platform I was on, I was able to take advantage of that time, like being with John Anik and Kenny Florian, right? Being their betting guy was something I was able to do, show personality, and then doing this with Coach, it was really all betting focused because if they were going to do just analyst work, as you see, they bring guys like my buddy Chael and Anthony Smith and Michael Bisping. They always lean towards fighters. Now, I don't have the same level of fighting career as they do, right? But being that I am knowledgeable, I can sit up there and speak with them and do a good job. By doing the betting side, I was able to create my own path and kind of a world of my own. So that's really how it worked out. And by having my own path, I kind of was able to make the rules with it. And as it grows, I get to grow with it, which is really exciting. So yeah, it was really just finding a niche where it was kind of untouched, but knowing at some point that a network like ESPN would be into it.
Now, kind of messing with the last part of your answer, for the people that don't really understand betting, in your honest opinion, because you do this professionally, do you feel like when someone that trains MMA or does some sort of a combat sport versus a fan, what do you think who has the better knowledge? Like, what would it be better for a person to bet in MMA? Like, should they have some sort of knowledge or should they just be a fan and go into it just like throw all their money in?
Well, that's a very loaded, fun question right there. Well, when it comes to betting, the biggest thing is being disciplined and not necessarily throwing all your money anywhere, right? You want to have a bankroll, you want to manage it correctly. You want to have fun with it. You don't want to make it so stressful that if you lose, you can't afford your life, essentially. That's where things get dangerous, right? I would say if you're looking to get into MMA betting, really take your time to know the sport. There's a reason why most sports bettors don't do well in other sports. There's a lot of other factors, right? So like with football, it's 11 on 11. There's field conditions, there's weather, there's injuries you don't know about, there's illnesses. With MMA, it's one-on-one. And the way that the sports books have now grown, there's so many different ways to bet a fight between over under rounds, method of victory, how many strikes, how many takedowns. I mean, it's really become more than just, oh, who's going to win. So I would say if you're getting into MMA betting, first and foremost, take your time, watch the fights. There's so many podcasts out there to get good information, education. It doesn't have to be from fighters. Not all fighters are great analysts as well. That's something that I will say, just because you're a professional athlete doesn't mean you'd be a great coach at the same time, right? So from a betting perspective, I would say if you're going to jump into that, take your time, go to like a fight card like UFC 317 and maybe start off with the main event, co-main event, the more popular guys, just so there's a lot more information that's easily accessible and kind of go that way and ease your way into it. Do not go crazy right from the jump. Like, please don't.
I I completely agree with you. I've seen a lot of people lose a lot of money, and it's not fun to see their reactions. But
Yeah,
we were talking about UFC 317, if I could say it out loud.
you're good.
Um, I kind of want to know what you actually do for covering and what your experience is like, especially talking about that. But what was your first coverage of a UFC event like?
Oh, it was kind of a dream come true, not to sound so cringy and it was a combination of things. This was something I always wanted to do um in some capacity, and for a while there was a gap of time there where nothing was really going my way with it, where I was almost like, you know what? I'm doing so many of these podcasts, these shows, not making any money out of it. I don't know how much longer I could keep chasing this without you know, making that decision, especially, now, like I said, I'm turning 40 next month. Um, I've reinvented myself so many times throughout my life, different careers, successful for the most part, but there's always failures along the way. And this one was a very rocky road, a lot of highs, a lot of lows. But when I finally got that call, doing PFL was a really good start for me. Although I was doing it from home because of the COVID era, all this stuff. So doing a live broadcast, doing some commentary from home was cool to be a part of it, but it was definitely a different vibe being on set for with ESPN for the UFC pay-per-view. Stepping on stage, being next to literally the first time ever filming the show with Brett Okamoto. We were right there, and it was me and Brett, and then I did UFC Live and UFC Pre-Show with Chael and with Anthony Smith, with Laura Senko, and doing all this, with these people. I don't really fanboy out. I just respect, because it's not just not built into the way I am. But it was definitely a little bit of a shock and awe standing up there with these people that are, legends of the sport, legends in broadcast, been doing it for a while. And then there's me coming in as someone that not many people would have known. They know me for different reasons. I owned a brand called Cage Hero where I was sponsoring fighters in Strikeforce and UFC many, many years ago. And then I was a manager. So people that know me back then, like I've known Dustin Poirier for like 15 years. So him and I working together at ESPN here and there is really funny in a full circle moment. So I will say that first time stepping on set was absolutely insane in the best way possible.
That's honestly really cool because it's like looking up to those fighters as a fan is, and you get to work with those guys, and that's pretty cool. And probably it's like a normal daily basis for you. And you're just like, yeah, guys.
It's
But
yeah, it's been fun, like someone like Chael, who I grew up watching. I never expected to have a friendship, and he's become one of my really closest friends. And he is such a genuinely amazing person. That personality you saw when he was a fighter, when he was talking trash about Brazil and all this stuff. It's so opposite of who he actually is. He's like the sweetest guy, and I'm not just saying this because he's my buddy. It's just he's such a Superman Clark Kent, takes it on, takes it off type of thing. It's truly incredible, and that's what I value the most about this. Some of these relationships I've made, getting to meet some of these people I work with, has been truly, truly amazing along the way as well.
well, I can completely agree with you because last week we did interview Shale, and I think a lot of people do see people like him and Colby Covington. And honestly,
Yeah,
between me and you, we could probably say Colby probably did learn it from Shale because Shale was probably the original starter for a lot of people that talk crap and all that stuff. But you're covering UFC 317. I kind of want to lean into these fights
sure.
and your opinion. So, when I originally saw Ilia Torpira for fighting Charles Oliveira, I think a lot of people wouldn't expect it, in my honest opinion, because you have someone that has such a high ability of striking, and then you have Oliveira's jiu-jitsu. But Oliveira is known for hitting with a lot of power, but he can take a lot of power and come back and get you. So I kind of want to know your opinion. Who's your pick in this fight?
Oh, all right. Well, transparently, I don't have an official. My bets aren't due yet until like 10 a.m. West Coast time on Friday before I film my show. So it's not that I don't want to give away any secrets here. I just don't have a complete answer because so for me, I look at it from a betting perspective first, and the betting lines are very, very wide. They're pretty much saying that Topuria is going to win with no problem. Look, Ilia Topuria is either this phenom that we believe he is, or he just hasn't really been truly tested yet, which is not his fault either. It just we've seen this story before, right? Where someone looks like an impossible, challenge, and then all of a sudden gets stopped, and we're like, all right, you know, it's interesting. Oliveira, somebody who I used to question, not so much his heart. I hate really going about that because I think he's overcome that narrative for a while now. But he did get dropped in a lot of fights. I mean, the Chandler fight, the Poirier fight, the Gaethje fight, the Islam fight. It was just Islam was the only one brave enough to go to the ground and take advantage of rocking him. If you get rocked by Ilia Topuria, you go to the shadow realm. You don't really wake up, right? That's the concern for Charles. But if you ask someone like Justin Gaethje, you ask Dustin Poirier, they say the person that's hit them the hardest has been Charles Oliveira. And we do know that his jiu-jitsu is fantastic. Ilya's got really good defensive jiu-jitsu from his wrestling, from his background in Georgia. So I think this fight may be closer and more competitive than people think. I don't think Oliveira is going to go out there and brawl. I think he's more than aware of the power. He's going to have a major size advantage. Ilya is saying he's going to go into the cage at 175 to 179. Even at 155, this is going to sound crazy, but that doesn't impress me or scare me because all these guys go in at that weight, right? So I'm more impressed that when he was at 45, that was the weight he was entering with. That's a different conversation. I think this fight's going to go a little deeper into the fight than people think. I think if it does end, it maybe would end in like a round 3. And it wouldn't surprise me if Oliveira took some rounds early. I mean, the guy can strike. He's going to have a reach advantage, and physically wise, he's going to be big. So I think this is going to be a really fun matchup. I hope it's a competitive one. But hey, if Poirier goes out there and puts his lights out quick, we'll see what happens next because he's got the goods to be a star.
I honestly agree with you because Ilia Topuria is getting on that rise, and if he fights and comes out how he wants to, and he beats Charles Oliveira, it's a statement. Because Charles Oliveira has been making a statement for a couple years, and he's been getting rocked, but he also can come up, and I don't think he's really faced anybody like Ilia Topuria. He's fought Gaethje, he's fought Poirier, he's fought Islam, but Islam's a powerhouse, so gotta give him credit where credit's due. But one of the other fights on the main card is Beneil Darwish versus Renato Moicano. What are your opinions on this fight? Where do you see this going?
Yeah, it's an interesting fight between Moicano and Dariush. Moicano coming off the loss to Islam and Dariush being very up and down, having his fight canceled. Um, it depends on which Beneil Dariush we get. This is somebody that was quietly floating around the top for a while, caught some bad breaks. On the feet, I think Dariush is the better striker, has more knockout power. On the ground, they're pretty even. That's why the betting line is almost even where it's at. It depends on how Moicano also bounces back from that Islam loss. I know he took that really hard. He felt like it was a wasted opportunity for him. Let's just say this. I know this might be a cop out of an answer because I would say flip a coin at this point, but I think the two of them are fighting each other at the right time in their careers, and it's the right fight to make because whoever loses, I don't know what's really left for them at that point. Because if you can't get past the other, you're not winning in the top 7 or top 8 at 55 at this point. There are some younger guys coming up. There's a new guard changing in the sport in general with these younger, faster, bigger animals of athletes. And I think some of these seasoned vets are going to start filing out. And this is one of them where one vet versus one vet, I do think the loser ends up retiring here.
Now, the last fight I want to get into for UFC 317 because I kind of do want to talk about who you've managed. I kind of want to get into that part.
Sure.
But Alexandre Pantoja versus Kai Kara France.
Yeah.
These two for flyweight have such strong abilities, and we see Kai Kara France fight Cody Garbrandt. We see Alexandre Pantoja fight Brandon Moreno. They fought household names, but these two it comes down who can land the better shot and the knockout shot and who can take the most power. For you, what are the key things that fans should be looking for in this fight?
Well, I think the biggest disparity here is Pantoja's jiu-jitsu and his pace. He's, if not one the best jiu-jitsu practitioner MMA at flyweight in the world. He's been able to win that way for a very long time. On the feet, his striking is really evolved, making his jiu-jitsu and his wrestling more effective and more dominant. That's how he beat Moreno. That was how he beat Royval. That was how he beat Sakura. And I think fighting someone in Kai Kara France, who's a very technical striker who carries power with good cardio, the biggest thing here to keep an eye on is Pantoja's jiu-jitsu. Although he fights a little bit like a zombie, he's not stupid. He only does that to get in close, get the fight to the floor. If he does that, I would not be shocked. I'll tell you right now, my pick is Pantoja. That one I'm not confused on. And I like Kai as a person. I think he's a talented fighter. I just don't know if anyone's beating Pantoja at 125 anytime soon.
Do you feel like there could be any potential like threat to Pantoja besides Kai Kara France? Do you think there's someone in the flyweight division, your own opinion, ready to fight him, ready to take the title from him?
You never know if someone's ready until they get in there. I think the Royval Joshua Van fight is going to tell us a lot about Josh Van, who's a very exciting up and coming young prospect. Fighting 5 times in 9 months, taking on Royval and in short notice. If he goes out there and just destroys Royval, he will be next, and he is somebody that on the feet really possesses a problem. But the biggest thing with Pantoja is just he's so good on the ground. He's so crafty and he's so durable. So if you can't knock this guy out, he always has a chance to get you down, take your back, and choke you. So I would say someone like Josh Van is someone to keep an eye out on. Tagir Ulanbekov coming off that win this weekend is another one who keeps floating around that bottom part of the top 10 that eventually will get a crack. The flyweight division is starting to load up with prospects, so it is interesting. Brandon Moreno's always floating around there. I'm sure he'll jump back in at some point, coming off his win. But yeah, and it's really interesting. Pantoja just is very well rounded. He's durable. He's got good cardio. So unless you put him out, it's hard to really see anyone beating him yet.
For the Joshua Van fight, obviously Joshua was a replacement because Manuel K fell through and got hurt.
Yep.
Do you think Joshua Van would be the guy? Obviously, you're saying he should be the guy to look at
Mhm.
after this fight if he can cultivate that win and get that. For you, honestly, for this fight, do you think this is just going to be an easy fight, or do you think, honestly, he's just going to have a tough time, or how is he going to do in your own eyes?
I mean, Brandon Royval is a pain in the butt to fight in general because he's what I call controlled chaos. Like he knows exactly what he's doing, but it's so hectic. And he's durable. He's got really creative jujitsu, so he could really change things up. And he's been in there. I mean, his last fight, that was the best we saw Brandon Royval look in a really long time. That version of Brandon Royval is as good as anybody at 125. So, I think Joshua Van this is one of those scenarios where it's just opportunity knocks, you take it. Even if he goes out there, as long as he doesn't get, choked out in the first minute, if he keeps it competitive, his stock will rise. He's still so young, so a loss here wouldn't kill his career. So I can't say he's going to go out there and win easily, lose easily. I see paths of victory for both of them. Cardio-wise, Royval will have the opportunity, to really implement a pace that I don't know if Van can keep up with. But Van's boxing is crazy. It's absolutely crazy in the way he goes to the body. So I think that fight can end up being fight of the year if it goes all three. I'm just saying if Van does win that fight, this kid will be champion. And if he loses, as long as it's competitively, I don't think that gets derailed.
Well, we can both agree flyweight division is starting to come back, and it's always
Sure.
been one of those divisions to be exciting to watch. But you talked earlier about managing fighters like Chris Weidman.
Yeah.
However you want to get into that, but my thing is, how did you actually get into that part of MMA?
Well, I always felt that with MMA, it was the wild, wild west, and there was just opportunities to have a career in it some way, somehow. And I created a brand called Cage Hero just because at the time there was so many brands out there that were not bad. I don't want to come off as saying that they were negative, but just on the violent side. And the problem that I had with it was at the time we were, trying to get MMA legalized everywhere. And, kids are starting to watch this. They want to do jujitsu. They want to do boxing and wrestling because of MMA, not the individualized sports, right? So not even saying to mom and dad, I want to go do jujitsu. I want to go take MMA classes. And parents at the time were like, oh, it's too violent. It's cage fighting. And they really weren't wrong per se. But if you really think about like professional wrestling, like WWE, you have a character like The Undertaker, who's one of my favorite characters of all time, favorite wrestlers of all time, but he's literally burying people alive, so children are watching scripted murder, if you want to call it that. People are getting hit in the head with a chair, they're bleeding, they're going through tables. So I was like, you know what? Why don't I create a brand where I sponsor some of these fighters, I turn them into superheroes. Therefore, if the kids like that fighter and they want to buy the clothes, kind of gives it a little bit of a positive aspect. With the quote, I said like the hero comes from within, trying to make it inspiring, all that good stuff. So when I was doing that, I was kind of figuring out with other managers what the price was, how some of these fighters were earning their sponsorship deals. And I was one of the people that was there when Chris Weidman first started at Ray Longo's gym. So, I had the relationship with him and John Vellante and Konstantinos Philippou, Ali Quinta, all those guys. And when I moved to Florida, I kept in touch with everyone. And I just said to them, I said, hey, look, I know you've been trying to get into the UFC. I've really built a relationship with a lot of people due to these sponsorship deals I've been doing. I think I can get you in. And I literally was just asking other managers questions like, hey, how do you do this? And they were like, just email Joe Silva, who was the matchmaker at the time. So I just was putting together emails. I said to Weidman, let's try it. Weidman goes, I'll give you X amount of time. If you get me and Vellante in, we're good. And that was how it happened. I kept emailing Joe Silva, 4-0 Chris Weidman, tutelage under Matt Serra, will beat Anderson Silva. I literally have these emails that one day I'll frame and give to Chris saying, this will be the guy to do it. And Joe Silva saying, I don't need another boring wrestler. I'm like, no, he's better than that. And then Chris went out and knocked out Uriah Hall, which was really what happened. And then one day, Joe Silva called me and he's like, hey, all right, you've annoyed me enough. Can Weidman fight in 2 weeks in Kentucky on the Versus card against Alessio Sakara? And I was like, I'm sure he'll say yes, right? So that night, I was actually in Jersey for John Vellante fighting on the Strikeforce card. Called Chris a bunch of times. He finally answered. And I said, hey, how do you feel about 2 weeks UFC? And he goes, I have a fractured thumb and a broken rib. I'm like, all right. So, and then I hear Longo in the back going, he's going to do it. So, that was really how it went. And from there, other guys in the gym hopped on board. And I was cold calling constantly all these brands for sponsorship deals to get these guys paid. And that's how it worked out. And that was my real way of breaking through on a more personal level, sponsoring these fighters. You just kind of talk to managers, but I've really built some great relationships through the sponsorship deals. Daniel Cormier, I was one of his first MMA sponsors in all of his whole career. Misha Tate, Kung Lee, Josh Thompson, Luke Rockhold, Chris, Chuck Liddell. I mean, it really kind of got me into the sport in a different way, in a more socialized way to network. And, sometimes you just got to keep going in different directions until you land on the right spot. So it worked.
With you talking about that, you cover these fights and you make your betting off of these fights. Do you feel like your time managing these fighters has helped you so much in betting and making these coverages?
Um, it's an interesting question. I would say the way I had to, well, so it's funny. Managing guys, I treated it probably a little bit differently than some of these other managers. And again, not a negative way, because these guys have a lot more of their roster than I did. I had like 5 guys. These guys have like hundreds of fighters from every organization under the sun. I always looked at it from a coaching, from a analytical standpoint, even though I would never step on toes. I would never call Ray and be like, oh, you need to have him work on his striking. Like, that wasn't my thing. I would call Ray and say, hey, I got an idea for opponents based on availability, based on style. I've watched this guy fight his last 3 fights. He does this, 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 this. And that's what I think made me successful getting Chris certain fights, along the way. It was just, it's helped me study fighters differently, which helps the betting part of it, which helps my workload with doing analysis in itself. Because there's other shows where I'm just on there as an analyst, and from there's no betting. So yeah, I would say that managing guys and really trying to help them with their careers, along the way. I mean, look, the UFC would say, hey, we have this for you. You're not going to say no, right? So not everything is the ideal situation. But for the most part, if you want to push your fighter as a manager, you're asking for certain matchups based on what could help your fighter. So to answer your question, yes, I would say it probably did help me, even though it was super into the future.
Right. And to kind of base off of that, for my last question for you,
Sure.
is you commentate for UC and PFL. For you, what do you think are the key differences between the two organizations?
Well, so I don't do commentary for the UFC. For the UFC, I do my show, UFC's Best Bets, and then I do analyst work for ESPN Australia for their UFC show, for their Spanish show, and for all their other content on pay-per-view week. So what I do for them, like I said, I have my own betting show for them. With the PFL, I do a little bit of everything where I do the betting show, and then I'm kind of like the Dean Thomas on Fight Night, where I'm the fourth man in the commentary booth. Will they'll go to me whether it's for betting or analyst, just to get a different voice in there. I would say the biggest difference, well, it's just I don't do commentary for the UFC, really. Although that's another dream, but that one is probably not attainable, and I'm okay admitting that one. The biggest difference within, I think, is the organizations. The UFC obviously is at a different level than the PFL right now. But I will say that, both have treated me exceptionally well. I really love working for both. It's just my roles are so different. Like for ESPN, it's a network as opposed to just a fight promotion, right? So like with the PFL, I'm throwing out ideas of matchmaking. I'm throwing out the ideas of marketing and social media and videos and features. I did a feature a few weeks ago with Kevin Lee before his fight. I wouldn't be able to do that with ESPN or the UFC right now because they already have so many people in place. So I would just say that the difference is that, you know, both companies just run differently. I've just enjoyed both. I take it all in. With PFL, for the fights, I'm cage side doing the commentary. I get to interact with everyone. With ESPN, I'm in the ESPN suite on the desk doing it that way. So it's just different. Both are so much fun though. People look at the PFL sometimes as like the junior. If you get to go to one of the events, their fights are exciting. The production's done really well. Both are so much fun.
Well, I had a good time talking to you. I got to learn more things about what you do, and I think a lot
Sure.
more people will learn about what your job is actually like and some of the things that you've gone through, and some of the things, cool things you've actually gotten to do. Now, before we go, if people are interested in especially what you do, working for ESPN, being an analyst, or getting into betting, what advice do you give those people?
Well, those are all different things. Getting into the betting side of it, just be smart, be disciplined, right? Take your time, don't rush. If you want to work for a place like ESPN or the UFC, PFL, I would say, you know, talk to people, right? Get everyone's story because everyone's story is going to be different. The timing of when it happens is going to be different. My thing happened during COVID. If COVID doesn't happen, I don't know if my opportunity of being able to do something remote would have been available and if I'd be sitting here being able to do this. I would say try to reach out to people that you look up to, that you want to hop into their career path and ask questions. I think in the MMA world, people are the most reachable compared to other sports, right? Like if you go on Twitter, you're not getting a hold of LeBron James, but you will get a response from a John Jones or a Conor McGregor. That's what makes this sport really special is that the biggest names will respond more often than other sports. And I would say, really have a plan and also understand that it's not going to happen overnight. In this sport, and this is not to crush anyone's dreams in the slightest bit, there's very few spots available with the bigger organizations. But that doesn't mean there's not a million of other organizations that aren't hiring that will pay you to do the job. And that's how you'll build your resume. There's a gentleman by the name of Ben Davis. I don't know if you've heard of Ben the Bane Davis. Ben is a very, very good friend of mine. I look at him almost like a little brother. This was somebody who his dream was to be like the next John Anik, right? And he was a social media personality for the most part. And I told him, instead of putting all your eggs in trying to be John Anik, why don't you be the best version of Ben Davis and keep doing what you're doing? And he was working a lot of small shows. This is now someone who's the head commentator and now essentially the John Anik for Misfits Boxing, which is run by KSI, which is tremendously huge in the UK. He does Anthony Pettis' organization. He does like every weekend, he's working a different MMA organization along with the biggest influential boxing fights. And he just did MTV's The Challenge, the reality show. So, my best advice would be the best version of yourself, have a goal. But this also took him like 5 or 6 years to reach, but he was just so consistent and always was asking me questions. I mean, and I was more than willing to help because that's what someone did for me. And, you may not get to the UFC one day or the PFL or ONE or LFA or Combate, but there's so many other ways to get to your goal. Just don't put a specific label on it and just be the hardest worker in the room and you'll get there.
Well, I love that advice, and I appreciate your time today. I know you're obviously busy,
All
and
good.
you get to do many things that I'm actually jealous of, which I have to
Oh,
fully admit. Hopefully one day I
we'll
will,
get there.
but I really hope, Ian. But I appreciate your time. Hopefully we get to see some things come out about UFC 317 involving you.
Sure.
But I appreciate your time and thank you for sitting down for an interview.
My pleasure. It's been fun.